All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Day 5. Can you believe we're already on day 5 of 40 days of 4VKM? And I was wrong yesterday in terms of the next video, the lost episode. I will promise that's actually tomorrow, episode 6. I got them mixed up. But very excited to talk to you about episode 5, which is one of my personal favorites. A lot of stuff started from this episode and became a major theme as the series went on. But episode 5 is titled Conquer the Darkness. And I actually got that from Vincent Fusca. I believe the translation of Vincent Fusca, in one manner or not, is Conquer the Darkness. So that was kind of the inspiration for the title. And it's all about the light shining out and really conquering the darkness. So I want to start off, as the video does, reading the prayer said every single day in the Oval Office during the Trump administration. And most of you guys know where I got this from, so don't have to go into that. But let me read it to you because it's very interesting. So it starts off, "Rest in peace, Mr. President, JFK. Through your wisdom and strength, since your tragic death, patriots have planned, installed, and by the grace of God, activated the beam of light. We will forever remember your sacrifice. May you look down from above and continue to guide us as we ring the bell of freedom and destroy those who wish to sacrifice our children, our way of life, and our world. We, the people." So, very interesting that this would be said every single day in the Oval Office, in the Trump Oval Office. You got to ask yourself why, right? So, when I think about a couple of the things in that prayer that they mention, the beam of light. First thing I thought about when it comes to JFK and a beam of light was the eternal flame that was put at his gravesite. Now we all know at this point that if you do an aerial shot over the grave of John F. Kennedy, the pavement is laid out in a Q. It's a Q. It's obvious. It's a Q. The letter Q. So he's buried in a Q. This eternal flame is established, and we're red today. Now, red is the favorite color of the Kennedy family. I got that from Patrick Bet David. But red also, gematria-wise, it equals 27. JFK equals 27. So red, JFK, it's the same thing. You're going to hear about a red line later on, or some will call it a JFK line. And you have the, what was the other one? The Bell of Freedom. Yeah, the Bell of Freedom. When I think about the Bell of Freedom, I think about that bell. The where we go one, we go all bell. So going back to the eternal flame, how did that kind of come about? Well, what's interesting is that JFK was actually at Arlington 8 months before his assassination in Dallas. And according to the historians, and you see this in the film, he basically said, "I could stay here forever." Like, he liked the place, right? He looked out over the view, he saw how beautiful it was, and he said, "I can stay here forever." And that's ultimately where his final resting spot was. Now, going back to the eternal flame. The eternal flame was a request by Jackie Kennedy. And she had reached out about a week or so before the burial. Not a week before the burial, but shortly before the burial. And had said, "I want an eternal flame to represent Jack." So it was actually the Army Corps of Engineers that had to come up and figure out a way to create this eternal flame. When I think of Army Corps of Engineers, I think of Red Castle. There's that red again, right? We all know what Red Castle was. So we'll call it Red Castle builds the eternal flame. We have also in here, you have the whole assassination, right? So I remember when I was a kid, I want to say this was 1999, Edge and Christian, these two smart-ass Canadians, right? Super heel characters, and they're actually in Dallas as the World Tag Team Champions. And Christian cuts this promo about how, it sucks being in Dallas and they can't wait to get out of there. And, Dallas is known for the JFK assassination. And even if he didn't get assassinated, JFK would have killed himself if he had to spend 5 more minutes in Dallas. And the place went crazy, super angry, right? Lots of good heel heat, as we like to call it. I remember watching this live at my dad's house, and I remember my dad laughing his ass off when that line dropped. So it was funny for some people, kind of a dagger for some others, but it was interesting to say the least. And going back to that subconscious memory, that was one of those memories that just, when it comes to JFK and this wrestling stuff, I can't ignore that fact, that one little speech that they had in Dallas that time. So going back to Dallas, you have JFK and Jackie arrive at Dallas that day on 11/22. You see a clip here. There's a wrestler. Wrestler was named Mr. Kennedy. And he would come out and he would announce himself, right? So usually when wrestlers come out and they make their entrance into, the ring, they will have a ring announcer announce them, from whatever town they're from, how much their weight is, da-da-da. Well, this guy, his whole gimmick was he announced himself. But he would always give extra focus on that Kennedy. His name was Mr. Kennedy. So it would go, Mr. Kennedy! And then he'd look at the camera and he'd go, Kennedy! And then he'll just keep going, Kennedy! He would just scream Kennedy. And, he was a major character in the 2000s of wrestling. So going back, I kind of jumped ahead here, but going back to that Edge and Christian promo, you have Christian kind of mention the fact, was it a lone gunman? And you see Lee Harvey Oswald. Was it a conspiracy? And you kind of see all of the presidents after JFK. And a lot of them had to do really with the cover-up. If you think about Gerald Ford, when he got in there, he was, he was big on the Warren Commission right there, right? So nobody buys the Warren Commission at this point in the game, right? But Gerald Ford, he was one of the main guys there on the Warren Commission. What's interesting is if you listen to Roger Stone tells a story about Richard Nixon, and I believe he asked him, he said, who killed Jack Kennedy? And Richard Nixon's exact phrase was, me and Lyndon Johnson both wanted to be president, but only one of us was willing to kill for it. So take that for what it is right there. And I'm paraphrasing there, but it's something along that line. So you have, all these guys kind of making sure nothing happens. And then every president after that kind of had their role in not releasing the JFK files, or at least not releasing all of them. And even President Trump, he never got them all out. But what I will say that I had never heard President Trump say before until recently, I believe it was on Roger Stone's podcast or radio show just a couple months ago. He asked him about these documents, and Trump said he would get the rest of them out. But the reason why that he didn't is because he has to protect certain people who are still alive. And he said it in a manner of like good people who are still alive, right? We never really think about it in that way. we always think about they won't release it to cover up for the bad guys, right? But Trump phrases it a little differently. He's basically saying there's some good guys that we have to protect that are still alive, and that's why he couldn't do it yet. So it's very interesting, to say the least. When you think about the premonition that JFK had 8 months before Dallas, when you think about the fact that they put a Q over his grave, when you think about the fact that the eternal flame was a thing, right? And Jackie Kennedy asked for that to get built. And, they had never built an eternal flame before. So they get the eternal flame built, and now that's the symbol of eternal light, if you look at it that way, or want to take a look at it in that regard. So fast forward a little bit. First WrestleMania I've ever gone to was WrestleMania 27. It was in Atlanta, Georgia. I was invited by some friends. They said, hey, we know you're a big wrestling fan. Do you want to come to WrestleMania? I was living in South Florida at the time, so we were going to drive up Atlanta. And I said, absolutely. I always wanted to go to WrestleMania, right? So I go to WrestleMania 27, JFK, right? 2011, The Rock returns to host this WrestleMania. He hadn't been in WWE in years. And I just remember sitting in the stands and saying, no matter what happens, I'm going to do everything in my power to go to every WrestleMania from here on out, because this is just the greatest experience I've ever been a part of. And sure enough, I've been able to accomplish that up to this point now. I think I've been to, that was 27, I don't know, I've lost count, 11 or 12 WrestleManias now, minus 2020 when the COVID happened and couldn't have any fans there. So, so I've kept that tradition going, and I owe my friends that invited me to that first one all for that. So I go to this WrestleMania, and I remember one of the greatest entrances I had ever seen in my life. It was for John Cena, and they had DMX The Prayer playing. I forget which number, but it was DMX The Prayer, and it was a video montage of John and all the great work that he's done with the community and kids and Make-A-Wish and all this stuff. And you also had this Atlanta-based gospel choir on the stage, and they're singing a variation of John's theme song. His theme song is, your time is up, my time is now. Your time is up, my time is now. Kind of symbolic of what everything's going on. It's like, hey, deep state, your time is up, our time is now. So you have this beautiful choir singing it, and going back to Atlanta, a big part of Atlanta's history is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is one of the heroes of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Every year, Vince McMahon, when he was running WWE, they would always make a big point to celebrate MLK Day, because it's always on a Monday. It's always Monday Night Raw on a Monday. And if you go back and look, you'll find countless tweets from Vince McMahon celebrating the life of Martin Luther King. So you see some clips in the video of MLK with JFK, with RFK, and kind of just Vince giving his respect to MLK. So you have John Cena then. He gets through, he breaks through, makes his entrance, right? Leading up to this, you see a couple clips. You see a couple clips of RFK Jr., who's running for president now, right? So this is the first time RFK Jr. appears in a 4VKM video, I believe. Might have been in Pesky Little Frog in the background, but for the most part. And you see some interesting clips. You see a picture of him with next standing side by side with somebody in a non-mask, one of those V for Vendetta masks. And you also have him posting a picture from the San Francisco Bay. The date of this post is 7/16. So if you remember, 7/16 was the the date of the JFK Jr. plane crash, right? So I think this was 7/16, maybe 2014, somewhere around that time frame. Might be off on the year. And it's a gentleman on a paddleboard standing up in the San Francisco Bay with his arms out, and he's wearing a yellow Anon mask, right? And everybody's just curious, who is this individual that's wearing this V for Vendetta mask that we can't see, right? So speaking of a John we can't see, that's John Cena's whole gimmick, right? So John Cena's whole gimmick is literally, you can't see me. That was his catchphrase. He'll take his hand, he'll wave it in front of the face, and he'll say, you can't see me. So little do people know, John Cena actually had an alter ego for a little bit. He lost a match where he couldn't compete anymore, or he was fired or something like that. But he was still advertised for these house shows, and it was all in storyline. So he was still going to make these house shows, but he competed under the name Juan Cena, and he would wear a mask like a luchador wrestler, right? So Juan Cena, and he would act, Spanish, right? And you can't see him still, right? But Juan Cena was a thing for a little bit, which was pretty fun. So when I think about Juan Cena, I think about the character 107. And 107, I just had a very interesting perspective because of where I was from, where I was born. Savin Hill, it's very close to the JFK Presidential Library. Now, if you look on this red line train map, which this is the first video I show this map in, and this map is so important to this to the 4VKM story, because if you zoom out, it gets even crazier. But we'll get in that later on. But the two stops that I highlight in this video is Savin Hill, and then the next stop from there is JFK UMass, which is the Presidential Library. The next stop from there is Andrew, which is my name, right? Just a coincidence, right? But that's why my Twitter is Next Stop Andrew, because I'm the next stop after JFK. The stop before Savin Hill is actually Fields Corner. And when I think about Fields Corner and I think about the story, I think about Phil McConnell a little bit, because he's told a little bit about the story, right? So you have Fields Corner. Phil McConnell kind of is the one that really introduced 107 onto the scene, right? He's the next stop. Then you have JFK. 107 tells a lot about JFK. JFK, and then Andrew telling the 4VKM story. So it's interesting. And it's all the red line, the JFK line. It's very cool. So, going back to 107, where Juan kind of won me over. And I know not everybody's a fan of his, but I think his information has been good. I think he served a purpose, sometimes maybe to throw some disinformation out there also. We know disinformation is necessary, right? So I think sometimes when he would drop dates or any of that stuff, I think it's all stuff to redirect the enemy and keep the enemy kind of off their toes a little bit. That's just me, my personal opinion. You guys can have your own. But one of the things that he said that I had never heard anybody else mention, it was the watch, right? If you guys remember, the watch is part of the drops. I won't say what drops, but you guys know. The watch was set at 129. And nobody really knew why. Nobody really knew what that meant. I had never seen a good decode on that until I heard Juan O'Savin talking about it one time. And he mentioned it basically that 129 was the minute after JFK was assassinated, Eastern Standard Time. And he said that was the moment, that was the minute that the counter coup had started, right? So it's almost like JFK knew that this was going to happen. They had a plan in place for when it did happen. And then that plan was initiated almost like a dead man switch at 1:29 Eastern Standard Time in Washington, D.C. by white hat generals or whatever you want to call it. But I think that's kind of really when the start was, right? We lost it at that point, and, the counter coup began at 1:29. So I had never really heard that perspective before. When I heard Juan say it, I said, holy crap, that makes all the sense in the world. It was confirmed later on, and you'll see in a video, if you remember a couple years ago, everybody went out to Dallas to see a certain somebody come back that didn't. But if you remember the news, Rachel Madcow, she was talking about how, 12/29, that's when they all met there, because that was the time that JFK was assassinated. It was at 12/29. So she kind of confirmed that in that news report there. So it's very interesting, to say the least. We have Red Castle involved. We have the prayer about JFK being said every day in the Oval Office, in the Trump Oval Office. I don't think there's a reason for us to believe that didn't happen. I guess you can if you want. But, it's signed We the People, which I've been telling you was a big thing that was going on in wrestling for years in 2013 and 14, and I think even into 15. It was a huge people love to scream it, We the People, in WWE crowds. So it's very cool. And then the last thing that I'll say, I skipped over this part, but something very similar between Trump and JFK. If you remember, JFK had his executive order 111110, essentially. And that basically transferred power from the Federal Reserve to the U.S. Treasury. Now, that was reversed by Lyndon B. Johnson. However, when Donald Trump was president in 2020 during the COVID crisis, Donald Trump actually did the same thing via executive order. He transferred the power of the Federal Reserve basically merged it with the U.S. Treasury. So very interesting. They were the only two presidents to kind of really do that, and kind of shows you that they both knew what the problem was, and they both kind of had the same approach to deal with that problem. So with that being said, enjoy episode 5. Conquer the Darkness. I think you guys will really like this episode. Dive into it. Shout out to DMX, RIP. Very, very lasting memory that he gave through that WrestleMania performance. So appreciate him for that and everything else he did. But Conquer the Darkness. You can get the link below on Rumble. Don't forget to subscribe to the 4VKM podcast YouTube channel. That is launching on February 21st, 2024. So can't wait to get that going so we can have more conversations like what we're talking about today. And we'll have some people on to talk about these views and whatnot. Some will agree, some won't agree. But it's going to be good regardless. So have a great day. And as always, enjoy the show.